Hello, fellow feminists. Welcome to AJATS, which stands for Alyssa, Joy, Alex, Tanuska, and Chris. Today, we examine how critical theory today defines feminism. Feminism Lens examines how patriarchy reinforces or undermines the economic, political, social, and psychological oppression of women.
Great definition, Chris. Today we will be discussing two books, The Bluest Eye and American Dirt, through the feminist lens. So first, we're going to talk about The Bluest Eye, and when I was reading it, when we're talking about the feminist lens, we have to kind of acknowledge the traditional gender roles of women and men. So I also, The Bluest Eye talks about social class, and it really, rather than acknowledging, race, it specifically targets, the differences between poor and rich, also within their own, race. So, traditional gender roles says that, women are typically, they cook, they clean, the roles inside the house. Well, the men are kind of they work outside, and they're the ones who are supposed to support the family economically. And however, for example, Pacola's mom, their family is poor, but both the women and the men work. While looking at richer families such as Geraldine, the women usually stay at home while the men work outside. And also, when looking at Charlie and his his role as a man in the house, you have to also notice that a lot of pressure is on the man's role of the family. And usually if they can't fulfill that role, for example, Charlie, he can't really fulfill that economic role in the house. He usually expresses his manliness in other areas, such as displaying his anger and his ability to hold liquor or coming home drunk. So
right. And there is about Charlie not being the main source of income in the household. I just wanted to point out that although in the book Mrs. Breedlove, Pacola's mother, is the main source of income in the household, she works in she does this job that requires cleaning, cooking, which although her working makes her untraditional in this way, but her job, her occupation, the content of her work is still limited to her domestic sphere. So I feel that just reinforces the traditional gender role for women. And then I think in our discussion we talked about the males in The Bluest Eye typically targeting little girls to prove their manhood and masculinity. Alex, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so what you were saying before about how her gender roles kind of went with her jobs in the house, I think on page 43 of The Bluest Eye, when they were kind of fighting when he came home, she was still in the kitchen doing her jobs in the kitchen, and he started fighting with her, and then the way that she fought back was described as a purely feminine way, which is when she was fighting back with frying pans and stuff that you would find in the kitchen. And I think this correlates to the gender roles because even though she's fighting back, which isn't typically a feminine thing to do, that the women don't really fight back, they just kind of take it, it's contradicted with the way that he was fighting her, which was kind of described as cowardly. So even though she was fighting back and kind of trying to break those gender norms of just taking it, she was still using the household stuff, which is once again female in the kitchen and stuff.
I would agree with that as well. Many times in The Bluest Eye, we see that when there's traditional feminine roles, such as, again, cooking the kitchen, and again, when they start fighting, it's typically with kitchen tools, and even if they try to fight back, they usually support traditional gender roles, which I suppose in a way the bluest eye is honestly more about the oppression of women than anything else. We see more oppression of women in the bluest eye than anything else in the book.
So, what Joy talked about men preying on specifically like little girls, and it's also you have to like the book references this many times, like using many characters like Mr. Harry, Charlie, and then
Soap at Church.
yeah. And also you have to think about like what makes these men think they have that power over these small little girls and that they can like take advantage of them or like they have that kind of like
Granted power.
granted
mentally.
power over them, which if you think about like current today, like that's definitely not okay. And although like in their society they mentioned this and like it wasn't okay like in the book either because they faced a lot of criticism. They had the dad like kick out Mr. Harry, but also I also want to talk about what Alex mentioned about Miss Breedlove fighting back against Charlie. And if you think about it, Miss Breedlove is like really like not traditionally what in a patriarchal concept of femininity, which is like women should be like submissive, they should be fragile, they should be modest, and Miss Breedlove doesn't really hold those type of typical characteristics, and so which I think is like through a feminist lens she's like that type of strong woman kind of character.
I think, and really similar to Mrs. Breedlove's like unconventional like characteristic, I think the prostitutes portrayed in The Bluest Eye, they're also like a untraditional example for women. In my opinion, they're using their femininity as kind of this weapon for them to earn status and earn their social like the position, like their defined social position. So I feel like in their situation they're not entirely powerless. However, like the fact that they're trading like sexual services for like societal recognition, like as a part of their identity, they do so at the expense of their self-esteem, and that also like changes how other people perceive them. So when the like quote unquote like good or like well-behaved women talk about the prostitutes, they just like they're despiseful.
I would agree with Joy. I definitely agree that though the prostitutes have power, that power comes with a very steep price, that being their own self-respect and their own way they are perceived by other women. But the other women also use this as a weapon for them. Though they are oppressed, they use the gossip, slander, and even like even secrets to gain power over these women. So they themselves can have power. They might be oppressed, they might not have the best childhood or the best marriage, but they had at least control over something, and that is the reputation of other women.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I feel like the other women, they're using their gossip like they are also oppressing other women, like in this case the prostitutes, to justify their goodness compared to like the less well-behaved prostitutes.
And I also agree that the gossip goes along with social like classes, but I also agree that it's like just in general like your wealth and stuff, because in The Bluest Eye, Pauline, she takes care of Charlie's house, and that Charlie, wait, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. So Miss Breedlove takes care of a little white girl in this big white house, And I think that really comments on the social standards at that time because of how the wealth of the White House is so directly contradicted with the wealth of her own house. And that's why it made it so hard for her to go back to her own family and take care of them with the same respect that she takes care of this little white girl. And it makes her envious of the life that she could have if she was wealthy and white, which is what the standard is. Which also leads me to another point, because on page 38 of The Bluest Eye, they're talking about how there's this one doll that every girl treasured, and how people would say, this is beautiful, and if you're worthy one day you may have it. And it's a little white girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. And I think that this also goes along with what the concept of femininity is, because one always strives to be white, blonde, beautiful, blue eyes in this society. And if you're not that, then other people don't view you as worthy and as feminine. So yeah, does anyone want to comment?
Yeah. So I want to comment on Miss Breedlove's view of what luxury life, living the, I guess you can see white wealthy life versus her reality or her life at home. And because of that separation, she kind of abandons her family for the family that she kind of wishes she had, or the life she wishes she has. And also that comments on the maternal aspect of femininity, which is women are seen as maternal mothers, and they're supposed to foster their children or take care of their children. And in that way, Miss Breedlove doesn't do that, and which you can see that effect on the main character, Hope, which also comments on the society's beauty standard, and how Pecola wishes she had something that she doesn't have, and she can't really change that. And because of that, or how she looks, her appearance, it's how society treats her as a girl. And also Pecola's as a main character, she really fits into the patriarchal concept of femininity that we talked about earlier, which is she kind of lets things happen to her. She doesn't really have that willpower or fight back. She kind of just accepts it all. And yeah, that's all I want to say.
And I feel that's a common theme for all the women in Bluest Eye. They don't really have any leverage against their oppression, whether it be the richer women or the poorer ones. They just so for the richer ones, they change themselves to fit the society's beauty standards. And for those in poverty, the women still they long to have the bluest eyes. They try to they willingly conform to society's beauty standards, and to gain that femininity, and to gain that approval or recognition as a good woman. I think that's all I have for the bluest eyes.
Phenomenal discussion, ladies, about the bluest eye, and how femininity plays a key role in the societal structure. Now moving on to American Dirt. This novel is about a Mexican woman who had to leave behind her life with her son, trying to escape to America from the dangers of the cartel. Ladies, take it away.
So in American Dirt, we can see that many women have suffered to their journey in order to find new lives in America. Many of them are running away mainly from the cartel. Others can be seen running away from their own problems. But the main thing I see in this is that many times it's only the women that have suffered through this journey, while you see the men are usually more relaxed. They show they fear that they're gonna get caught, they're gonna be sent back, but they don't have the femininity fear that women have of being raped or being sold as human trafficking, as human merchandise. And I feel that this is something that really can be seen throughout American Dirt. feel that you might agree with this as well.
I think a big part of why men are not seen as scared of the dangers of the cartel is because the main background of the story is Lydia. She's trying to escape to America from the cartel, from this man named Javier, who basically killed her husband and her entire family at a quinceañera because the dad wrote about him being part of the cartel, which isn't related to femininity, but the main reason why it's so difficult for her to escape is because Javier is kind of, like, in a sense, viewing her as an object and as a love interest. And I think that also, like, shows a big part of how men kind of see women sometimes as objects and just, like, as, like, Javier's trying to get Lydia, and he's doing whatever he can to get her.
And I wanted to add to, like, the objectification part about Javier. I feel like his mindset is really typical of a man, like, typical of patriarchy. So in his mind, he sees his relationship with Lydia as this process that even if, like, he can, like, massacre her whole family and be a threat to her son, Javier, he kind of makes me feel like he thinks that he can still own Lydia as an object if he manages to capture her, like, while ignoring her feelings and resentment toward him. So in his subconscious mind, Javier assumes that, like, Lydia kind of doesn't have her needs and she isn't really capable of, I don't know, like escaping or crossing him or taking care of herself if he gets his hands on her eventually. And another example I wanted to bring up is the twin sisters, Soledad and Rebecca. And I feel like American Dirt, the novel, just expresses this gender role impression that females must be beautiful, sweet, and young if they're to be worthy of romantic admiration. The twin sisters, on their journey, they suffered numerous sexual assaults, and they're constantly being they encounter more trouble than men, or than women who are less attractive.
And I agree with Joy on that. It is true that the sisters do account more trouble than Lydia and even her son, which is surprising, considering she's a grown woman. She has a son, but that doesn't mean her aspects of physical beauty is any less. But again, these girls what they go through is just terrible. Any other woman would just, it's a terrible thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, talking about Javier and his, kind of view of Lydia as a person, or more like an object. But it can also be, seen, how, it's not just Lydia, he probably, views all women the same, because in the book, it talks about him having, multiple women, his wife, and then, mistress, and then Lydia. So, that's, 3 women. And also, it's, also, common view for, I think with all the men in the book, which is they all view women as objects, especially since as she's going on her journey, you kind of learn that what happens to these women as they travel up north, and even when the men are selling these girls for profit, it's they're just kind of goods and not actually people. So the men don't have any respect for women, and especially beauty is also a very strong aspect, and it makes it very dangerous for girls versus girls who aren't as beautiful, because they're more they attract more attention, and especially in such a society, attention isn't necessarily a good thing.
I think a great example of that, like selling them for money, is when the border control man, he basically told Javier where they were just in exchange for money, which I think really like goes to show how men view women. And honestly, it could have been like anyone, because it was border control, and like it could have been a woman if it was. But I think this does a great example of kind of like a metaphor for just like he sold them for money. And I also think another point is that the book does a really good job of kind of contrasting how like maternal Lydia was with her son Luca trying to get over the border, because he was a younger kid. So I think it does a good job of showing like how she was a mother and how she was like a good mother figure, but at the same time she was still viewed as an object by Javier. And so it shows how such strong women can still sometimes be seen as an object by men, no matter like what her circumstances are.
And speaking of like maternalism in American Dirt, I just want to compare the two like mothers in the two books. So in American Dirt, like Alex talked about, Lydia is such a good mother. She is so strong, she is so protective, and she remembers to help others along her way. And she just does this really good job of like protecting her son, taking care of him during his growth, despite like the troubles they encounter. But in The Bluest Eyes, Pecola's mother, Mrs. Breedlove, is almost like a counterexample of being a mother. So she kind of ignores Pecola, and she doesn't recognize Pecola as her daughter. She doesn't give her the attention. And in the end of the book, when Charlie rapes Pecola, Mrs. Breedlove, first of all, didn't believe her. And then when she figured out what actually happened, she beats Pecola to her miscarriage. And I think that's just a really interesting contrast between the two mothers. So I wanted to ask this question. Is Pecola's mother less maternal than Luca's? And if so, why is that? Is it due to their socioeconomic status? Is it due to her due to their upbringing, education, or their mission in life? What do you guys think about that?
I would say that Pecola's mother isn't any less than Luca's mother. One reason would be, the main reason for me would be the fact that she stayed. Even though Charlie was this abusive man, even though they didn't have anything, even though she could have left that man, could have left Pecola and her son and just started a new life somewhere else, she stayed because she knew what would happen to Pecola and her son if she left. She knew that if she didn't stay, these kids won't have anything left. So I would say that, yes, she is a terrible mother. Yes, she isn't the prime example of what a mother would be like, but I wouldn't say she's a horrible mother because she stayed, and that's the biggest thing.
I think that I agree with you, and I also think that both of the mothers in both stories kind of want a new life. In The Bluest Eye, she would rather be a rich woman in a rich house with all the nice things, and she kind of neglects her own daughter just for the fact that she wants to be higher up in status. And then in American Dirt, she wants a new life away from Javier and in America to kind of reinvent herself. So they both want to reinvent themselves, but the difference is Lydia is including her own child in this and wants better for him too, whereas in The Bluest Eye, I think she's kind of focused on herself, less maternal and more just self motivated. But I think they're still both good mothers because what you said, she did stay, she didn't leave. But yeah.
Alex, I think you bring up a good point, but one thing I also wanted to add is how Mrs. Breedlove and Lydia, their view and perception of themselves are actually, I think they're really different in how, so Mrs. Breedlove is not as mature, in my opinion, or in the aspect of how she kind of victimizes herself rather than, because while she grew up oppressed, I don't think it's right for her to treat her own daughter like that, while Lydia is more conscious of her oppression and she's more aware of how she should treat her son like correctly instead of like kind of victimizing herself and not really just like raise her son in the proper way.
Right. To sum it up, Lydia, in our opinion, copes better with the oppression that she receives as a woman, while Mrs. Breedlove, because she suffers, like the trauma from poverty and like all those factors combined, she is just not as capable to recognize the oppression and cope with it and deal with it.
Phenomenal job, ladies. Next time on Ajats, we'll be talking about racism. Okay, bye!